The sound of laughter echoed through the elegant hall just as a glass tipped over. Red wine splashed across Jonathan Roumie's jacket, dripping down the front in slow, painful streaks. Conversations paused. Heads turned. A few people gasped. The teenage boy holding the empty glass stared for half a second, then laughed. His parents laughed too. "Well," the mother scoffed loudly, "maybe next time you should learn where you're standing." The father smirked. "If you want respect at events like this, you should dress like you belong here." The boy wiped his hands on his pants, completely unbothered. "It's just wine. He'll live." Jonathan looked down at his jacket. Then he looked up. He didn't shout. He didn't insult them. He didn't even look angry. He simply smiled, calm, controlled, almost peaceful. "It's all right," he said quietly. "Accidents happen." That smile made the parents laugh even harder. "See," the father said, waving dismissively. "Not a big deal. People like him are used to it." People nearby chuckled awkwardly. Some avoided eye contact. Others pulled out their phones, sensing drama. Jonathan stepped slightly to the side, gently brushing the wine with a napkin. His calm felt out of place among the mockery. The mother leaned closer to her husband and whispered, loud enough for others to hear, "Who even invites people like that to a gala like this?" The father shook his head. "Probably someone's +1. Definitely not important." Jonathan heard every word. Still, he said nothing. What none of them realized, what made this moment dangerously ironic, was that Jonathan Roumie wasn't just another guest. He wasn't a nobody. He wasn't background noise. And he definitely wasn't powerless. In fact, within the next few minutes, the very people laughing at him would realize something terrifying. The man they had just humiliated was the final authority on their family's $650 million business deal. And once that truth came out, no apology would be enough. The charity gala was meant to celebrate generosity, influence, and unity, but beneath the glittering chandeliers and polished marble floors, something darker always lingered. This was not a room filled with kindness. It was a room filled with status. Every table told a story of money and power. Designer dresses brushed against tailored suits. Watches sparkled under soft golden lights. Laughter floated through the air, practiced and strategic, each smile carefully measured. People weren't here just to give. They were here to be seen. Jonathan Roumie stood near the edge of the hall, just beyond the center of attention. He wasn't hidden, but he wasn't trying to be noticed either. His suit was simple, well-fitted but unflashy. No loud accessories. No exaggerated gestures. He held a glass of water, not wine, and observed the room quietly. He had arrived alone. No assistants rushed ahead of him. No security cleared his path. No one announced his name. And that was exactly how he preferred it. Jonathan had learned long ago that the truest version of people revealed itself when they believed no one important was watching. Tonight, he wasn't here to make speeches or shake hands. He was here to observe, to listen, to decide. Across the room, the wealthy couple, the parents of the teenage boy, were enjoying the spotlight. The father spoke loudly, his voice cutting through the chatter as he boasted about expansion plans, future acquisitions, and exclusive partnerships that only a few powerful families could access. His wife laughed often, touching his arm, nodding proudly as if every word were a trophy. Their teenage son darted around the tables, restless and bored. He had grown up surrounded by wealth, taught early that rules bent for people like him. Guests smiled at him indulgently when he passed. Staff stepped aside. No one corrected his careless movements. He was untouchable, or so he believed. Jonathan watched this unfold with quiet interest. He noticed how the parents barely looked at the servers when they spoke. How they interrupted others mid-sentence. How they measured people by clothes, posture, and confidence rather than character. This wasn't new to him. In rooms like this, respect was often transactional. If someone thought you had nothing to offer, you became invisible. Jonathan took a slow breath and glanced around the hall. At the far end stood a raised stage with a podium, currently empty. Behind it, a massive screen displayed the charity's logo and a list of sponsors. The final sponsor slot remained blank. That blank space mattered more than anyone realized. Tonight, a single decision would determine whether a major investment partnership moved forward or quietly disappeared. Contracts were prepared. Numbers were finalized. Only one approval remained. Jonathan's approval. Yet no one seemed to recognize him. And that was the most revealing part. As the evening progressed, waiters weaved between guests, offering drinks and hors d'oeuvres. The music softened, and conversations grew louder, fueled by wine and ego. The teenage boy grabbed a glass from a passing tray without looking. He spun around quickly, laughing at something his father said. And that was when it happened. The collision was sudden. The wine tipped, the glass tilted, and deep red liquid spilled forward, soaking into Jonathan's jacket. Time seemed to slow. A few nearby guests inhaled sharply. One woman covered her mouth. Another stepped back instinctively. Jonathan didn't move. He looked down calmly, processing the moment without reaction. Years of experience had taught him that how people responded after a mistake mattered far more than the mistake itself. The boy stared for a second, then laughed. His parents turned, and instead of concern, their faces filled with amusement. That reaction told Jonathan everything. Still, he remained composed. He wiped the jacket slowly, deliberately. Not embarrassed. Not angry. Just attentive. The gala continued buzzing around them, unaware that a silent test had just begun. And the people who had failed it didn't even know they were being tested at all. For a brief moment after the wine spilled, the room hovered in uncertainty. Jonathan Roumie stood still, his jacket stained deep red, the fabric slowly darkening as the liquid settled in. He looked at it calmly, as if studying a painting rather than damage. Then he lifted his gaze to the teenage boy. "It's okay," Jonathan said gently. "These things happen." His voice was steady. No accusation. No tension. But instead of relief or apology, the boy grinned. "It's just wine," he said loudly. "Relax." A few people nearby chuckled, encouraged by the boy's confidence. Laughter, once invited, spreads easily in rooms like this. The parents stepped forward. The mother glanced at Jonathan's jacket, then at his shoes, and finally at his face, her expression sharpening into something between judgment and amusement. "Well," she said, crossing her arms, "maybe you should be more careful where you stand. This is a busy event." Jonathan nodded politely. "Of course." That answer seemed to disappoint her. The father laughed and added, "Honestly, if you're going to attend a gala like this, you should expect a few accidents. Especially if you're not used to crowds like these." Jonathan met his eyes. Observant. "I've been in many crowds," he replied. "Accidents don't bother me. Reactions do." The father scoffed. "Oh, don't be dramatic." The teenage boy rolled his eyes and whispered something to his parents. They laughed again, this time louder. A small circle began to form. People slowed as they passed. Some stopped pretending not to notice. Jonathan could feel it, the shift. This was no longer about spilled wine. It was about hierarchy. About who mattered and who didn't. He reached for a napkin from a nearby table and gently dabbed his jacket. "I'll take care of this," he said quietly. The mother tilted her head. "You don't need to make a scene." Jonathan paused, his hand still. "A scene?" he repeated softly. "Yes," she replied. "People like you always do when something doesn't go your way." That sentence landed heavier than the wine. Jonathan straightened slightly. "I haven't raised my voice," he said. "I haven't blamed anyone. I simply accepted an accident." The father waved dismissively. "Look, we're not trying to offend you. But let's be honest, this event isn't exactly casual. It's for serious people." Jonathan smiled faintly. "I agree. Serious people should act seriously." The smile irritated them. The boy snorted. "Dad, can we just go? This is boring." The father chuckled. "See? Even my son understands. Don't take it personally." Nearby, a waiter hovered uncertainly, holding a fresh napkin. He looked at Jonathan, then at the parents, unsure who to approach. Jonathan accepted the napkin with a nod. "Thank you." The waiter exhaled in relief and stepped back. The mother leaned toward her husband. Honestly, who invites people like this anyway? Jonathan heard it clearly. So did a few others. A woman at the neighboring table frowned. A man in a dark suit shifted uncomfortably. But no one spoke up. Silence is often the loudest form of agreement. Jonathan folded the napkin slowly. "May I ask you something?" he said. The father shrugged. "Sure. Make it quick. What do you believe respect is based on?" Jonathan asked. The father laughed. "That's easy. Success. Influence. Being someone. And how do you recognize that?" Jonathan continued. The father gestured around the room. "Look around. It's obvious." Jonathan nodded thoughtfully. "So if someone doesn't look important, they aren't?" The mother smiled thinly. "That's usually how it works." Jonathan looked around the hall, then back at them. "That's an expensive belief," he said quietly. The father raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me." Jonathan didn't explain. Instead, he stepped back, giving them space. He picked up his glass of water, untouched since the incident, and turned slightly away from them. The parents took that as victory. "See," the father muttered. "Knew he'd back off." The boy laughed again, louder this time. But across the room, something had changed. A man near the stage stared at Jonathan, his expression tightening with recognition. He leaned toward another executive and whispered urgently. The executive followed his gaze. And suddenly, the laughter around Jonathan didn't feel quite so safe anymore. Because while the parents believed the conflict was over, it had only just begun. Jonathan Roumie took a small step away from the group, not in retreat, but in control. He adjusted his jacket one last time, the red stain now impossible to ignore, and placed his empty glass on a nearby table. His movements were unhurried, deliberate, almost ceremonial. Anyone watching closely would have noticed something unusual. He wasn't shaken. In rooms like this, embarrassment usually shows itself immediately. People rush to explain, to defend, to reclaim their dignity. Jonathan did none of that. He simply observed. Behind him, the parents resumed their conversation as if nothing of importance had occurred. The father laughed loudly, telling another couple about a sure-thing investment that would change everything. The mother smiled proudly, nodding along, occasionally glancing at Jonathan with a look that suggested the matter was settled. To them, it was over. But the atmosphere around them had shifted. A few guests who had witnessed the exchange now looked uneasy. A woman near the edge of the group whispered to her companion, her eyes flicking back toward Jonathan. Another man cleared his throat and checked his phone, suddenly very interested in something else. The teenage boy leaned against a table, smirking. He mimicked Jonathan's calm tone under his breath, earning another laugh from his parents. Jonathan heard it. Still, he said nothing. He moved a few steps farther toward the edge of the hall, positioning himself where he could see the stage clearly. The podium remained empty, but the large screen behind it flickered as technicians made final adjustments. Names of donors and sponsors cycled through slowly. One name was still missing. Jonathan folded his hands loosely in front of him and waited. Across the room, a senior executive in a tailored charcoal suit stared at him in disbelief. The man's eyes narrowed as he tried to be certain. He leaned closer to another executive and whispered sharply, "That's him." The second executive frowned. "Who?" "The one we've been waiting for." The color drained from the man's face. Both executives looked back toward Jonathan. Then, almost instinctively, their gazes shifted to the parents standing nearby, still laughing, still unaware. The executive swallowed. "Do they know?" "I don't think so," the first replied quietly. "And that's a problem." The room, once buzzing with confident noise, seemed to grow heavier. Conversations continued, but they lost their rhythm. Laughter sounded forced now, slightly delayed, as if people were laughing because they felt they were supposed to. Jonathan sensed it too. Not recognition, yet. But tension. The kind that comes before a storm. He noticed staff members exchanging glances. A server paused mid-step, watching the executives hurry toward the stage. Another staff member discreetly stepped out of the hall, speaking urgently into a headset. The parents noticed none of it. The father clapped a hand on another man's shoulder. "Trust me," he said loudly, "once this deal is signed tonight, everything changes." Jonathan closed his eyes briefly. Not in anger. In acceptance. Nearby, an older woman who had witnessed the incident earlier approached Jonathan hesitantly. "Sir," she said softly, "are you all right?" Jonathan opened his eyes and smiled at her. "I'm fine. Thank you for asking." Her expression tightened with concern. Some people forget their manners when they feel powerful. Jonathan nodded. "Power doesn't reveal character," he said. "It tests it." She looked at him for a moment longer, as if trying to place him. Then she stepped away, thoughtful. The music in the hall faded slightly. A subtle cue, but enough to draw attention. A man in a sleek black suit approached the microphone on stage and tapped it once. The sound echoed, cutting through the remaining chatter. "Ladies and gentlemen," the host said, his voice calm but formal, "if I may have your attention." The room slowly quieted. The parents turned toward the stage, still smiling, expecting recognition. The teenage boy sighed dramatically and straightened his posture, suddenly interested. Jonathan did not move. He kept his eyes on the host. The executives stood off to the side now, tense, watching both Jonathan and the family who had mocked him moments earlier. The host cleared his throat. "Before we continue with tonight's program, there is a matter of importance we'd like to address." A pause. Long enough to feel uncomfortable. Jonathan exhaled slowly. This was the moment. Around the hall, people leaned forward slightly. Phones lowered. Conversations stopped entirely. The parents exchanged confused looks. "What's going on?" the mother whispered. The father shrugged, still confident. "Probably just formalities." Jonathan's reflection caught his eye in a mirrored pillar nearby, the stained jacket, the calm face, the unbroken composure. He straightened his shoulders. Because when the next words were spoken, everything in that room was about to change. The host stood at the podium, hands resting lightly on either side, scanning the room as if choosing his next words carefully. "This evening," he began, "represents months of preparation, negotiation, and trust." A polite ripple of applause moved through the hall. Jonathan Roumie remained still, his expression unreadable. The host continued, "Tonight's gala is not only about charity. It also marks the final step toward our largest investment partnership to date." At the word largest, the father straightened, smoothing his jacket. His wife smiled, already anticipating congratulations. Their son glanced around, suddenly alert. The host gestured toward the massive screen behind him. Numbers appeared briefly, then vanished. "This partnership," the host said, "represents a commitment of $650 million. A low murmur swept through the room. The father leaned toward his wife and whispered, "This is it." Jonathan watched quietly. "But," the host added, raising one finger, "as with all great investments, success depends not only on numbers, but on values." That caused a few curious glances. The host paused again, this time deliberately. His eyes shifted, not toward the proud family near the center, but toward the edge of the hall. "Before we proceed," he said, "it is my honor to welcome the individual whose approval makes this partnership possible." A spotlight flickered on. Not on the stage, but on Jonathan Roumie. The room froze. For a fraction of a second, no one clapped. No one spoke. No one breathed. Then recognition spread like fire through dry grass. Whispers erupted. "That's him. No way. He's the one. I didn't even notice." The parents turned slowly, following the direction of the light. Their smiles collapsed. The mother's face drained of color. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed again. The father's confident posture stiffened, his hands curling into fists at his sides. Their son stared, eyes wide, suddenly unable to laugh. Jonathan did not move when the spotlight found him. He didn't acknowledge the attention. He didn't raise his hand. The host continued, his voice now louder, steadier. "Jonathan Roumie, lead investor, final signatory, and chairman overseeing this partnership." Applause erupted. Thunderous. Sudden. Relentless. People who had laughed earlier now clapped hardest. Some stood. Others nodded respectfully, as if they had known all along. Jonathan waited for the applause to fade before stepping forward. As he walked toward the stage, guests parted instinctively, creating a clear path. Faces shifted from curiosity to admiration to embarrassment. He passed the parents. The father swallowed hard. "Jonathan, Mr. Roumie, I." Jonathan didn't stop. He climbed the steps to the stage calmly, each footstep echoing louder than the applause had. When he reached the podium, the host stepped aside. Jonathan placed his hands lightly on the microphone. Silence returned. "I came here tonight," Jonathan said, his voice even, "to finalize a partnership." The father nodded rapidly from below the stage, forcing a hopeful smile. Jonathan continued, "Before making decisions of this scale, I prefer to observe quietly." His eyes moved across the room, then settled, briefly, on the family. "To see how people treat one another," he said. "Especially when they believe nothing is at stake." The room felt smaller now. Heavier. "I experienced an accident earlier this evening," Jonathan said. "Wine spilled on my jacket." A ripple of discomfort spread. He lifted his sleeve slightly, showing the stain. "I was not upset by the spill," he continued. "But I paid close attention to what followed." He paused. How people laughed. How assumptions were made. How respect disappeared the moment someone was judged as unimportant. The parents stood frozen. Jonathan looked directly at them now. "Character," he said calmly, "is not revealed when things go right. It's revealed when there is nothing to gain." The father stepped forward, his voice shaking. "Sir, please. We meant no disrespect." Jonathan raised one hand gently. "This is not about apology," he said. "It's about alignment." He turned back to the audience. A partnership of this magnitude requires more than ambition. It requires humility. He took a breath. "For that reason," Jonathan said, "I will not be moving forward with this deal." The words landed like a shockwave. Gasps echoed across the hall. The mother staggered slightly, gripping her husband's arm. The father's face went pale. The teenage boy stared at the floor, his earlier confidence completely erased. Jonathan nodded once, as if confirming his own decision. "Let this be a reminder," he said, "that how you treat people when you think they don't matter, matters most of all." He stepped back from the microphone. The room remained silent. Because in a single moment, everything had changed. The silence that followed Jonathan's decision felt heavier than the applause that had come before it. No music played. No one spoke. People stood frozen in place, processing the reality that had just settled over the room. A deal worth $650 million, months of planning, endless meetings, whispered promises, had vanished in a single sentence. Jonathan Roumie stepped away from the podium. He did not rush. He did not linger. He simply moved with calm certainty, as if the outcome had been decided long before he ever walked onto the stage. Behind him, the host remained still, unsure whether to resume the program or allow the moment to breathe. The executives exchanged anxious looks, understanding that nothing could soften what had just happened. Near the center of the hall, the parents finally moved. The father took a hesitant step forward, his confidence completely stripped away. His shoulders sagged under the weight of realization. The mother followed, her earlier sharp expression replaced by panic. "Mr. Roumie," the father said, his voice unsteady, "please, we made a mistake." Jonathan stopped walking but did not turn around. "Everyone makes mistakes," he replied calmly. The father swallowed. "We judged you unfairly. We spoke without thinking." Jonathan turned slowly now, facing them. "You spoke honestly," he said. "That's the difference." The words cut deeper than anger ever could. The teenage boy stood behind his parents, silent for the first time that evening. His eyes were fixed on the floor. The laughter that once came so easily now felt distant, shame replacing arrogance. "I didn't mean it," the boy muttered quietly. Jonathan looked at him. "Intent doesn't erase impact," he said gently. "But learning from it can." The boy nodded faintly, unable to meet his eyes. Around them, guests listened closely. No one interrupted. No one dared. Jonathan turned back toward the executives. "I appreciate the preparation that went into tonight," he said. "But my decision stands." One of the executives stepped forward cautiously. "Of course, Mr. Roumie. We respect your judgment." Jonathan nodded. "Good," he replied. "Because leadership isn't about numbers alone. It's about the culture you choose to support." He glanced once more around the hall, at the chandeliers, the polished floors, the carefully curated image of importance. Then he looked toward the staff. A server stood near the wall, the same one who had earlier hesitated, unsure who deserved courtesy. Jonathan walked toward him. "Thank you for your patience earlier," Jonathan said quietly. The server blinked, surprised. "Of course, sir." Jonathan smiled. "You handled yourself with professionalism. That matters." The server straightened, pride flickering across his face. Jonathan then turned toward an older woman seated near the edge of the room, the one who had checked on him earlier. He nodded respectfully. "Kindness," he said softly, "never goes unnoticed." She smiled, eyes glistening. The parents watched all of this, the contrast unbearable. The father finally spoke again, desperation edging into his voice. "Is there anything we can do to fix this?" Jonathan considered the question for a moment. "Yes," he said. Hope sparked briefly in their eyes. "Do better," Jonathan continued. "Not for a deal. Not for money. But because you should." The hope faded, replaced by understanding. Jonathan turned away once more. As he made his way toward the exit, the room slowly began to move again. Conversations resumed in hushed tones. People avoided the parents' gaze. Phones stayed lowered. No one wanted to be caught reacting the wrong way now. At the entrance, Jonathan paused. He slipped off his stained jacket and folded it over his arm, revealing a clean white shirt beneath. Unmarked. Simple. Before stepping outside, he looked back one last time, not with anger, not with pride, but with quiet finality. "Respect," he said calmly, "costs nothing. But the lack of it can cost everything." Then he walked out. The doors closed behind him. And inside the grand hall, surrounded by luxury and loss, everyone was left with the same realization. The most powerful lesson of the night had nothing to do with money at all. The gala continued, but it was no longer the same event. The music returned eventually. Glasses clinked again. Conversations resumed. Yet something invisible had shifted in the room, something no amount of wealth or elegance could repair. People spoke more softly now. Laughter was cautious. Compliments were measured. No one wanted to be remembered as the next lesson. The parents stood apart from the crowd, surrounded by luxury yet completely isolated. For the first time that evening, they were invisible, not because they lacked power, but because they had revealed something far more costly than ignorance. They had revealed who they were when they thought it didn't matter. Their son sat quietly beside them, staring at the table. The confidence he had worn so effortlessly was gone. In its place was something unfamiliar, reflection. For the first time, he understood that money could open doors, but character decided whether those doors stayed open. Across the hall, staff members moved with renewed awareness. Servers were thanked more often. Eyes met more respectfully. Small gestures of courtesy, so easy, yet so often forgotten, suddenly felt important again. Because everyone had seen what happened when respect was treated as optional. Jonathan Roumie was already gone, but his presence lingered. Not because of his wealth. Not because of his authority. But because of his restraint. He had not shouted. He had not humiliated anyone publicly for revenge. He had not demanded recognition. He had simply allowed people to be themselves, and then responded accordingly. That is real power. True power doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand attention. It doesn't need to prove anything. It watches. It listens. And when the moment comes, it acts with clarity. The lesson of that night was simple, yet devastatingly clear. Respect should never be conditional. It should not depend on someone's clothes, their status, their confidence, or the room they stand in. Because the truth is, you never fully know who someone is, or what they carry, by appearance alone. The quiet man in the corner may hold more influence than the loudest voice in the room. The person you overlook today may decide your future tomorrow. And the way you treat someone when you believe they have nothing to offer you, that is the truest reflection of your character. Too often, people believe respect is something earned only by success. But respect is not a reward. It is a choice. A choice made in moments of inconvenience. A choice made when no one is watching. A choice made when kindness offers no immediate return. That night, a spilled glass of wine exposed far more than arrogance. It exposed values. Some people lost a deal. Some lost their pride. And others gained something far more important, a reminder. A reminder that humility is strength. That silence can be powerful. And that dignity, once lost, is far harder to regain than money. As the guests slowly filtered out of the hall, one truth followed them into the night. You don't need power to show respect, but you need respect to deserve power. So the next time you meet someone, anyone, pause before you judge. Because you never know who you're standing in front of. And more importantly, you never know who you're revealing yourself to be. If this story reminded you that kindness still matters, type respect in the comments red heart, and tell me where you're watching from. I want to thank every person who believes humility is real strength.